Mark Rogers TV with you on the eve of another huge elimination-type week in college football. We bring in Brian Leigh to talk about Ohio State, Michigan State. Brian Leigh from Bleacher Report joins us. Hey, Brian, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
So this is the date that's been circled on Big Ten calendar since the beginning of the season. Big Ten fans were hoping that the matchup would be a little bit higher ranked at this point, both teams losing the big non-conference games. But here we stand like 7 or 8 weeks later, and they both have gone unscathed since. So your initial thoughts about this matchup and who might have the edge?
Yeah, well, it's a really tough one just because they've gone unscathed since, but in many ways they've gone untested since. Depending your opinion of Nebraska, I personally think they're a pretty good team, not a great team. That's the best team either of them has played when Michigan State beat Nebraska earlier this season. So it's a tough game to figure out. The line that Vegas has is 3 for the Spartans, which basically means that they don't know either, and they're just giving the home team the normal advantage. It's tough to gauge an advantage past home field advantage just because they're so talented on paper and they've looked so good in spots beating up on inferior teams, but we haven't seen them play much of anyone.
Yeah, let's start with Ohio State because I think Michigan State might be a little bit more of a known factor against quality competition based on what they were able to display in 3 quarters against Oregon and then going back to last season's success. So JT Barrett at quarterback had his issues against Virginia Tech. Much of that was offensive line related at the same time and receivers not being able to separate. He's been much different since then and has really posted some huge numbers. Excluding the Penn State game was a bit of a bump in the road for him. So your thoughts about JT Barrett and his ability to move the ball against the Sparty?
Yeah, it's really staggering, his splits between good defenses and bad defenses, just because Virginia Tech and Penn State statistically are both really, really good defenses. So you can forgive him for struggling a little bit. And the teams he's carved up are statistically really, really bad defenses, so you almost have to dock him for playing as well as he had. Michigan State falls into the former camp. They're just as good as Virginia Tech. They're just as good as Penn State. And he struggled on the road at Penn State, which I think is important because that was his first or biggest true road game. As a Maryland graduate, I can confirm that Byrd Stadium was not a Maryland graduate, but a former Maryland student. I can confirm that Byrd Stadium was not the toughest environment for JT Barrett. So I think he can play well. He's got a good arm, and Michigan State's secondary hasn't been what it was last year. The pass rush is going to be a problem. I think he can find some success, but I'm really curious how he's going to manage the first couple quarters, the wave of adrenaline, the road environment. Once he starts getting comfortable and sitting in the pocket and making throws, I think he can do some things against the secondary that has been giving up big plays. They gave up a lot of big plays to Oregon. They gave up a few against Nebraska in that fourth quarter, too. If he gets comfortable, he can do it. It's just a matter of if he digs himself into a hole early, and if he does, how big that hole is.
I think you bring up a good point because it wasn't all JT Barrett's issue against Virginia Tech. If you listen to Urban Meyer's news conference, they were hit with the defense that they did not expect to see. Virginia Tech definitely game planned the entire summer for a date with Ohio State. The receivers weren't winning one-on-one matchups. The offensive line wasn't able to protect. JT Barrett was kind of caught in the middle. Then they completely go off on teams like Rutgers and Maryland, as you mentioned, and we think, oh, well, the Ohio State talent's taking over. Then they hit the bump in the road, as we mentioned, against Penn State. So it's going to be interesting to see how they respond against Michigan State. In addition, they need the running game. This is not a 40-pass team per game. They want to throw it 20 or 25 times, and Ezekiel Elliott's shown us a lot of development, a lot of improvement as the main back in replacing Carlos Hyde. At the same time, Michigan State, hey, if they held Amir Abdullah to minimal yardage, like 40, 45 yards, whatever it was, I'm finding it a hard time to believe that Ohio State's going to be able to consistently run Michigan State.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I actually think the running game is more important than Barrett in this game. There's a stat called opportunity yards that's mined by Bill Connolly at Football Study Hall. It's basically the percentage of runs that gain at least 5 yards. And Ohio State leads the country in that. They're not putting up big plays, but they've been very efficient running the football. More than half of their runs gain at least 5 yards. Michigan State, however, leads the country in opportunity yards against. Less than roughly a fourth of the runs against them, they're holding the opponent to less than 5 yards. So I think the thing to watch in this game is how Ohio State runs the ball on 1st and 10, on 2nd and 10. If they're picking up big chunks, 6, 7 yards, and setting up a 3rd and 2, there's a big difference between that and picking up 2 yards like Nebraska did and settling into a 3rd and 8 with a freshman quarterback on the road. And Ohio State's offensive line, for all the bad things that can and have been said about them, they struggle in pass protection, but they've been good blocking for the run. And I really do think that how Ezekiel Elliot gets going, how Ohio State does, just not necessarily breaking long runs, which is, again, what Michigan State's weakness has been this year, but how they do churning out those 7-yard gains could be what decides this game.
I find it interesting to see what Urban Meyer came in with and what his plan was to build this as another Florida in regards to an offense, and then what they've become and what they got close to last year, of course, with Braxton Miller at the controls. And one thing that he wants to build is a team that has multiple guys that are so dynamic on the outside in space that you don't know where they're going. And he's pieced together a few guys, and they tear up the marginal teams. Again, Dontre Wilson, Devin Smith on the outside, who's a home run hitter. Michael Thomas has emerged, and some other guys as well. He wants 5, 6 guys that he can go to. He seems to have that again against the marginal teams. We have yet to see that type of production against a really good defense, and that's going to be interesting to see the one-on-one matchups on the outside.
Yeah, it will be. They did not look good against Virginia Tech, who plays it's reductive to call it the same style, but they play a similar man-to-man defensive scheme to that of Pat Narduzzi. And people like Devin Smith couldn't get off the line against Kendall Fuller. And Trey Waynes, I don't think is as good as Kendall Fuller, but he's close. Darian Hicks has been coming on as the opposite cornerback this year. He's getting better every week. Michigan State, they're going to run their defense. They're never going to change that. Pat Narduzzi is stubborn, and I mean that as a compliment. They're going to challenge Ohio State's playmakers to beat them off the line because I don't think they can.
Yeah, and if we look at Michigan State's offense, if we switch sides of the ball, for those people that tune into the big games, try to find the best game of the week, and they haven't seen Michigan State maybe play the entire season, and for whatever reason are forgetting the Rose Bowl and the Big Ten championship game last year, and are expecting the Spartans just to line up and try to slug it out, this is a dynamic passing game at this point. No, they don't want to throw it 40 times, but they want to throw it 25 to 28 efficiently, and they will hit you for the big play. Connor Cook's just a different guy than he was at this point last season. This is when he was making those big maturation steps at this point last year. So Ohio State, throw out the stats. This is a place where you can really throw out the stats, because if you look at yards per game against through the air, Ohio State ranks way up there. And I believe that their talent on the outside at corner has improved, but their ball skills really aren't that good. They continue to get hit up for big plays against really good passing teams, and this could be an issue.
Yeah, I think it could be a big issue. It's definitely the biggest test their secondary has faced. Those questions were sort of the storyline that dominated the offseason for Ohio State. Was the new defensive coordinator, Chris Ash, was how the secondary that struggled so much last year and had to replace 3 starters would fare. And guys like Eli Apple, guys like Von Bell have looked great, but who have they played? The best receiver they faced was probably Stephon Diggs from Maryland. Maryland did not do much in that game, but I do recall a few plays where Stephon Diggs got behind Deron Grant and C.J. Brown, as he's wont to do, missed an open receiver. Tony Lippett might be the best player, or the most disproportionate player in terms of how good he is and how little he's talked about. He is having an All-American type season this year. If not for being benched in the games where Michigan State took such a big lead and didn't need their starters in past halftime, I think he'd have stats up there with the Amari Coopers and the Kevin Whites. Connor Cook's not afraid to look for him down the field. He caught a touchdown against Ohio State last year. And Deron Grant, he's been better this year, but I'm dubious that he's fully turned the corner. He really struggled in the Michigan State game last year. He struggled against Clemson last year. he's struggled with these guys that are NFL-type receivers, and he's ostensibly going to spend a lot of time on Tony Lippett on Saturday. And if he can shut him down, Michigan State's offense, they don't really know what to do if Tony Lippett's not going, because he's gotten going against everyone this year. So if Deron Grant can shut him down, Ohio State has a chance.
Hey, Brian, these are the personnel breakdowns, the X's and O's. I'm going to give you more of an intangible question, because if you run down the rosters of the two teams and add up the stars next to the recruiting rankings, Ohio State wins by a landslide. These are top 5 to top 10 recruiting classes for Michigan State. They're more like 35 to 40 recruiting classes. Michigan State, though, appears to be a mentally tougher team, maybe a physically tougher team, and Ohio State, again, the 24 straight leading into the Big Ten championship game last year. Then they got hit in the mouth. It was a really good game. They wilted late in the fourth quarter, got stopped on fourth down. We saw them not be able to close the deal on Clemson, and then we see what we see this year, albeit with a backup quarterback. So it looks like a mentally tough, physically tough, just hardened team in Michigan State, and a lot of elite athletes who haven't necessarily come together and been that type of team for Ohio State. Do you think that's fair to assess at this point?
Yeah, for the most part, yes. It's fair to say, but I also think it's been said so often that the Ohio State players have to have caught wind of it, and I'm expecting them to come out sort of emboldened to play tougher because of it. It'll be a nice test for them. You're going up against this team that everyone calls blue collar as a compliment, and people think Ohio State is good, but the way you just described them is sort of how people think of what Urban Meyer's built is a finesse team, a team that wins against bad opponents because they're better athletes, but isn't necessarily blue collar. The thing that people love to describe Michigan State as. Things have gotten a little chippy in the press conferences this week, and just the war of the words. Not as much as an Ohio State-Michigan game or Michigan State-Michigan game, but I don't expect Ohio State to come out and just get pushed off the ball the way Michigan did. It's not going to be a listless performance. Joey Bosa is tough. he's not gonna take kindly to being on the field and being known as the prissy 5-star team going up against the plucky, the blue collar workers.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to take any shots at any particular players for the Buckeyes. They have toughness, and if there's been anything that Urban Meyer, in looking at how he's run his practices in the spring and throughout August, is he has tried to toughen up this team, and he puts them through the rigors. They have to earn their shoulder pads. They have to earn the right to be Ohio State players. They play their first practice week on a high school sandlot, basically, to just try to earn the right to be Ohio State players on the Ohio State practice field. He has done everything possible to try to toughen this team up, and that's what he's looking for. And I'm sure that has been accomplished. It just doesn't seem to have worked in a cohesive fashion, and the standards are extremely high. I'm rating them against Ohio State standards. Can you win a national championship standards? Whatever they are at this point, like 30-3 under Urban Meyer's. Not too bad. So Brian Leigh of Bleacher Report joins us to knock out the Michigan State-Ohio State preview. Brian, we thank you so much for the time. We'll let you go. We'll bring you right back and talk some more college football.
Yeah, definitely.